My name is Reid, and I started Real Gardening when I was 16 years old. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background leading up to Real Gardening and then where we've gone to from there. I've always been entrepreneurial, and I think it's something that is in you. Like our previous speakers spoke about the businesses that they've done. You'll know if you're into business, and if you're not, and if you, there's space in our society for people that are going to be entrepreneurial and create their own businesses. But equally, if not more important, are the people that are going to help those entrepreneurs and are going to work for that business. So you have to understand that maybe if you're not the person that's going to be coming up with something or starting a business, there is a huge place for you working in and around entrepreneurs in their businesses. My first business was when I was 7 years old. And I used to go with my mom down to a place called Petticoat Lane. I don't know if any of you remember that, and get the rubber stamps, you know, the wooden blocks with the stamps. And every single Christmas present, birthday present, I asked for the stamps. I created a catalogue of them with different kinds of paper. I put that in people's post boxes down our street, and people would order from me. And I would take back the catalogue, take the order, and deliver the cards, greeting cards. And I made all my pocket money that way for about 5 years. And then moving forward, when the pick-it-up bins were delivered, we went from using black bags to pick-it-up bins. And I remember coming home from school one day, and two ladies were fighting in the street over the one bin that was left at sunset. And I thought, why hasn't anyone marked their bins with their names or their street numbers? And I asked my mom, and my mom said, well, what are we going to do? Just paint on it, and it will look really scruffy. So I went upstairs on the computer, and I printed out every letter and every number in that stencil print on Word. And I cut them out, and I made stencils. And then I charged people 20 Rand, and I would go and spray paint their street number and their name on their bin. And I made the rest of my pocket money up until I was 17 that way. Those are two really simple things, and I used just, you know, what I had around me. So I never had to get pocket money from my parents. My mom was a social worker, she was a single parent, and we didn't have a lot of money at home. So that was my way of helping out. So what happened was, my mom said to me that if, well, my dad was still at home at that stage, said to me that if I planted vegetables at home, they would buy them from me instead of the local fruit and veg. And that was a way that I would make pocket money. And I found it very difficult to get the seeds to stay in the ground where they needed to be. I went inside and I asked our maid Maggie to come and help me. And when Maggie said to me that she had tried to plant previously in Rustenburg where she lived, and she struggled, she couldn't get the seeds to stay in the ground, she felt that she had wasted a lot of money, and she couldn't understand what the seed packets were telling her to do, that I realized there needed to be a simple problem. And that was my next business after the bins. So the solution was Real Gardening. And Real Gardening is a pre-fertilized seed strip. It looks like this, really simple. And the seeds are in it with the correct distance apart with organic fertilizer, and you just have to put it in the ground, add water, and it will grow. So that's me in a school uniform, like lots of you are sitting here today, and those were my reels. They didn't look like this. My mom couldn't afford to help me put together a prototype, so I took plastic paper plates, if you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. I stuck those together. I made the strips out of newspaper and with my Koki pens. And that's what I used to do, and I used to sell them to my mom's friends. I was a very diligent child. If I was never scared of work, and I would be the last one working in the library and the last one working at home. The problem was my mind doesn't get around maths and science. I can think in an art way, English, history. I did incredibly well at school in those subjects. But something just doesn't click in my brain, and those were and I'm sure, but that's something that, and this is where teachers are very important. I sat in my maths class, I would get there, my science class, I would get there early, I would leave late, I would try and try. And my science teacher didn't care. Because I was at the back of the class, and she perceived it as I was, I would sit at the front of the class, but I was at the back of the class marks-wise. She would perceive it that I wasn't trying. I wasn't trying hard enough. And what happened was, One day, she asked us to do this homework, and I misunderstood something completely with regards to the chemistry. And I'll never forget that she took a book out of the closet, out of the classroom, and she threw it at me in front of the entire class, and she told me that I better, maybe my textbook doesn't work in the same way hers does, and maybe I would get my homework right if I started using her textbook. And I felt so just, I really was trying, and I felt she wasn't meeting me halfway. On the other side of things, my art teacher, Mrs. Moore, and to this day, I am still stay in touch with her, and she came to my wedding as well. And I've seen that's a way to make you guys like us. So, Miss Moore sat down with me. She's now Mrs. Condonello, but Miss Moore sat down with me, and at this stage, my science teacher said to me that I was failing science. It was coming up. I was in grade 10. We were going into having to choose our subject. It was the middle of the year. She told me I had to drop to standard grade from higher grade. But I have always known I wanted to be an architect. If you asked me from the age of 7 what interested me, it was designing, it was art, it was spaces, it was creating a place where people would live and would raise their children. That is what I would spend hours doing. You ask me about any architect or any building, I would know it. And it wasn't because I was asked to study it, it was because that was what I wanted to do when I was finished with my homework. And take that as a message. If there's something that you want to do, no matter if you want to get up early on a Saturday morning, you want to read, you want to look up a documentary about it, you want to look it up on the internet, that's where you should be focusing on doing your career, no matter what it is. Don't look at how much money you're going to make out of it. And my science teacher said to me, I needed to drop to standard grade. If I had to drop to standard grade, that means I would never be able to become an architect. Because to be an architect, you have to give above 60% in higher grade science in matric. Already getting above 60% in science in standard grade was going to be difficult for me. So I begged and pleaded with my science teacher if there was something I could do for extra marks that the rest of the students didn't have to do, and that way I would get somewhere. And she said, well, they need to enter someone into ESCOM Expo, and it's something that she thinks is silly and no one's really paying attention to it, but if I want to do that, at least someone can go forward for that. She was really not, she just didn't want to be a teacher, and I think that's where So I sat down with my art teacher, and my art teacher said to me, this is such an exciting opportunity, and how do we start to use art to teach you things that you need for science? And so then it came out that I was really interested and I was doing real gardening, and she said, well, how do we now take the design element into this? And how do we put that forward for a science project? And my art teacher spent extra time with me every single day after school, helping me put together my science project. And I entered it into ESCOM Expo for Young Scientists as that 16-year-old girl standing there, and I won the entire national competition. And okay, I'll be very quick, but there's 2 things I need to come. Okay, I'll be very, very quick. So I entered it in. The Department of Water Affairs and Forestry asked me to do science tests to see how much water it saves. I did those. I won a huge competition in Stockholm held by the King and the Queen. I came back to South Africa with this huge prize. Thabo Mbeki gave me a prize at the Presidential Guest House. I won a prize for scientific research below the age of 35, and I thought, I've done it. I'm going to make a business out of this. People are going to put money behind this idea, and we're going to go somewhere. But you have to understand, yes, you could have the most amazing idea, but people put money into people. And exactly like Tracy said, investors or people giving you a bursary, I was able to then get a bursary out of this because my mother never would have been able to afford to send me to university. So I got a bursary to study architecture from winning this award. The Department of Water Affairs and Forestry gave me a bursary. And I thought, well, at least now I can get into university. I've got a bursary. And I wasn't accepted into Tukkies. And I remember receiving that letter, and I was in the beginning of my matric year, and I thought, this is on my path. And I remember receiving that letter, and I was so devastated. And I thought everything I've worked so hard for is being taken away from me. And I thought I never would have been able to go to university because I never would have afforded it. But now I had, the money was there. People wanted to see me go, but I couldn't get into the course I wanted to. And I didn't give up. And I asked my mom to drive me to Pretoria, and I sat outside the Department of Architecture until one of the professors came out. And I asked him if I could walk him to his car, and I could explain to him why he needs to give me a chance. And he didn't know who I was, but he said, fine, my car's there. You've got 2 minutes. And I convinced him that if he let me in, I promise I would get the highest mark in that class that I'm physically able to do, but I knew I would do well in there. And if after the first semester he didn't want me to be there anymore, I wouldn't come. And I wouldn't ask for my money back. And I remained the top student in the architecture degree right through to my master's program. So I ended up in the end of my 3rd year sitting down with that same professor and saying, if I'm the top student and I really don't think in maths and science, why do the rest of the architects coming into this department need to think in maths and science? And they actually started to put together a whole program now that you go for 4 weeks every weekend, and there's lots of different tests to evaluate you, not just based on those 2 marks, because those 2 marks were going to define my entire life, and I didn't want that to happen. So I just want that as a word of warning, that you're putting out these university applications or college applications. If people come back and they tell you you're not good enough, and you believe you are, don't take their word for it. There is always, but be humble in the way in which you do that. Real Gardening is now a company. I was able to secure a loan to start up the company after I finished university. No one wanted to give me a loan to set up my company until they knew that I was ready to run a company. And university was able to do that for me. It is a very, very critical thing, further education. It doesn't have to be a university, it can be a college, but you need to look at further education. So it started, this was me in my 16 years. We've got a product now, which I showed you, and now this is my team. So I believe in employing previously unemployed mothers. Exactly like we've said, women are a huge critical part of this, our society, and where I can employ women and mothers, I will. And when I can employ, I employ someone for passion, and if we need to work out skills and education, that can come afterwards as well. And I'm now pleased to say, that I entered into a big prize at the end of last year, one of 10,000 applicants in the world, and we're now in the one of top 6. And this is the last thing, the one prerequisite for this award was that you needed to have an MBA. I do not even know what MBA stands for. So, however, I knew we would do well in this award. So I found someone with an MBA from the University of Cape Town that was as passionate about food security as I was, and asked him to join my team. So that's another thing in business. You have to be good at so many things because you've got all of these subjects to do. But when you know what your passion is, start focusing on that. That is where your career will go. And the other aspects you're not great at, like for me, it's maths and science, there is someone on my team that's their joy, and that's their love, and that's how we make teams, and that's what drives forward. So that's my story, and I hope any of you want to get hold of us. It's Real Gardening. I've got my cards and everything, and I'm happy to help any way I can. Thank you.